Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of React Roundup. I am TJ Van Tol, and with me today I have Giuseppe Gurgone, which hopefully I pronounced all right. Giuseppe, welcome to React Roundup. Why don't you start by telling us who you are, what you do, why you're famous, all that good sort of stuff.
Thank you, TJ. Thanks for having me. Hello everyone. I'm Giuseppe. I'm an independent web engineer right now. I love to work on developer experience, infrastructure, writing CSS and JavaScript, advocating for accessibility and working on open source. I've been core maintainer of CSS, co-author of Vercel Style J6 and other CSS and JS libraries, and I'm excited to be here with you to talk about React Native for Web today and future HTML and CSS.
Yeah.
Hey folks, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and lately I've been working on actually building out Top End Devs. If you're interested, you can go to topenddevs.com/podcast, and you can actually hear a little bit more about my story, about why I'm doing what I'm doing with Top End Devs, why I changed it from devchat.tv to Top End Devs. But what I really want to get into is that I have decided that I'm going to build the platform that I always wished I had with devchat.tv, and I renamed it to Top End Devs because I want to give you the resources that are going to help you to build the career that you want, right? So whether you want to be an influencer in tech, whether you want to go and just max out your salary and then go live a lifestyle with your family, your friends, or just traveling the world or whatever, I want to give you the resources that are going to help you do that. We're going to have career and leadership resources in there, and we're going to be giving you content on a regular basis to help you level up and max out your career. So go check it out at topenddevs.com. If you sign up before my birthday, that's December 14th. If you sign up before my birthday, you can get 50% off the lifetime of your subscription. Once again, that's topenddevs.com.
Yeah, and I know we want to get into a few different things today, but let's start with React Native Web, because I know you have some background there and you've written about it. And maybe you could start by just laying out for people, what is React Native Web? What does it do? What problem does it try to solve for you?
Yeah, so React Native for Web is a implementation of the React Native APIs for the browser. So essentially, in a few years ago, Nicholas Gallagher, who is by the way, creator of Normalized CSS and other popular open source projects, started this project with the intent to implement a library for React that would allow to use the same API and had compatibility with the React Native APIs, so that you could use the same abstraction but for building for the web. This way, you could essentially have an application that will be written once, possibly, and then be cross-platform. So the goal of React Native for Web is to allow you to write the same React Native that you write for iOS and Android, but this time also for the web. And that's essentially how it started. And it actually started because Nicholas was working at Twitter back then, and they started this process of rewriting the mobile version of Twitter.com. And over time, the project grew, and nowadays the framework is used for the entire Twitter web properties.
Yeah, I was honestly really surprised when that happened, because I had some background in the sort of cross-platform frameworks, right? You write once and it goes to mobile and the web and such. And when I'd used those types of approaches before, the web one was always like it spit out some junk that you were just happy that it worked, right? Like it was like a compromised version of it. And so when I saw that Twitter was actually deploying their live website with this sort of approach, it just straight up shocked me. Not only that they were doing this, but that also it was quite good. Like I went in expecting like, oh, this is going to be a janky experience, but it's actually incredibly good. Like the mobile Twitter website especially is, I think, one of the best examples of what the mobile web can do out there. So I just remember that like shocking me that sort of thing is possible to be built with that sort of architecture.
Right. Yeah. The goal I believe was to build a very fast application that would be very good on mobile, like mobile friendly, with all the interaction and touch capabilities that you would expect from mobile applications. Still build a PWA, basically a progressive web application that could be installed and would work offline. I mean, obviously, would render offline. Well, you get to some degree offline support. Normally, obviously, Twitter is a real-time application, so you gotta be online to get fresh content all the time. But yeah, otherwise, yeah. And so from the beginning, I'm pretty sure the goal was to optimize for performance, for quality in terms of app. So because that's basically you're competing with native, right? And I believe that Twitter specifically doesn't want to compete with Android and iOS clients, but still we managed to provide a high quality application.
Yeah, it is sort of fascinating to me. And maybe we could dive a little bit deeper into when you say like mobile specific stuff. Like, can you get into some details? Like, what does React Native Web do for you that, like, say, your basic HTML and DOM primitives would not?
Right. First of all, the DOM APIs surface is massive. A lot of APIs. There are different vendors, which is probably the most important thing to keep in mind. And with vendors, if you worked in this space for a while, you learned the hard way probably that sometimes there are inconsistencies or lack of feature parity, which it's probably something we don't talk too often about. But for me, as a developer, I really wish feature parity was a thing. So coordinated release of new API. And there is Chrome, sometimes amazing new cutting edge APIs, and other trying to catch up. Sometimes it's Firefox, sometimes it's Safari, rarely. But yeah, so in that sense, React Native for Web tries to reduce the API search to very few primitives that are basically, this is a work that already React Native did. So they did this work and came up with a very small set of primitives. There are essentially a text component, a view component that is used for a layout, an image component, a touchable components for interactions, which is at the same time mobile, keyboard, and mouse friendly. So it works in a variety of environments and with different input devices. So React Native for Web basically took advantage of all the research that was done in mobile with React Native, and that was proven to be working for those other platforms, to then bring those findings to the web. And essentially, you have a foundation of very robust and touch-friendly APIs that would work out of the box.
Yeah, it's funny because in a way, Android and iOS had a big advantage on the web when it comes to touch stuff, because if you think about it, the UI components for those platforms were built with touch as like the use case. Like
exactly.
That's all they had to do. So of course they were going to make them really well optimized for that, because that's the whole reason they were building them.
Right.
Whereas the web, you have this platform that was invented to like show web pages in the 90s that has been slowly evolved. And then touch had to be like bolted on top. Like browsers would basically at the start, browsers would like emulate, like when you touch the screen, the browser would essentially fire mouse events for you, because that's the only way, because they just wanted it to work.
Exactly.
And so I feel like we're still, and like, touch devices have been out there for a long time, but I still feel like the current set of events out there is an absolute mess. There's still mouse events you have to worry about. There are touch events. Touch events are like non-standard and handled differently. There's pointer events, which actually I'm not totally sure what the state of those are, if those were just abandoned or if those are...
They're actually a thing, and they're really good, and it's something that you can, I think, rely on nowadays, but still, it took quite a while to get where we are today, and there's still a lot of catch up to do with native. For, as you mentioned, gestures, are often built in other platforms, at least APIs for working with that kind of stuff. React Native has this concept of a responder. There is a whole category of things that the web initially wasn't meant to have, and like that access to also APIs that allowed you to interact with the OS in different ways. And so the web obviously is a open platform. It moves slow. It takes time, and it wasn't born for that. It was born in an era when that there was no such thing. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think this might be a good segue to the topic of your article. So you wrote an article that I'm going to link in the show notes about Twitter's div soup and uglified CSS.
Yeah.
And the background behind this is kind of fun because I'm certainly have noticed this as well. But if anybody ever views sources on twitter.com, the web version of Twitter, and looks around, you will probably be like, if you're like an old school web developer like I am, your first reaction is like, oh God, what are they doing here? What are they building? Because there are divs everywhere. It's like divs with like ARIA attributes so it's accessible. But it's like with ARIA attributes, it's a whole bunch of divs. It's a whole bunch of CSS class names like everywhere, lots of them. And so your initial reaction, I think, like for most developers, is like, oh, what is Twitter doing here? Right? Like this is a hot mess. And so your article is about explaining this. So maybe you could like just sort of lay out like why does Twitter's markup look this way at a high level?
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, I'm old school developer as well. I've been working on the web for more than a decade. And the reason why, first of all, I just want to explain why I wrote that article. And that is because I spent some time understanding and even React Native web and looking at the Twitter.com source code, reverse engineering it, and trying to figure out what it is like it is right now. And I felt like I had kind of some insight that I wanted to share, but I would find myself trying to do that every time I would see a tweet where somebody complained about this stuff. And on Twitter, it's really hard to have a real conversation with people. One tweet easily become a tree of many threads where your replies get lost or you don't manage to get your point through, or simply the original post get too many reactions that the author just muted. And
yep.
And then this thing repeats over and over again. And essentially, there's an awesome GIF I found around where there's this guy who's trying to wipe the sea back to the sea. Like, it never ends because the water keeps coming to you. And that's where I figured, well, maybe I'll just write what I know, and that's what I did. And so what I explained that is like, yeah, no big deal. Well, it's not a mystery that Twitter used React Native for web. At least it wasn't for me, but probably many didn't realize that yet. And explain the why of when you inspect the page, you see what you see there. Like, maybe there were the author of the framework made some unconventional, controversial choices. And it all started again from React Native trying to then be compiled to platform code. That's the HTML and CSS for us. So what you see is a compiled code that, in fact, instead was authored with React Native web, where you get those primitives. So you use text whenever you need to write some text. That would be a paragraph, and then headings, and anything that really is a text, and a view that is essentially for layout. It's in React Native. It uses Flexbox because React Native doesn't support grid yet, and then the other components are image, just whenever you need to display an image, and touchable for, as I said earlier, for interaction, touch buttons, and all that. So those components, in order to to implement the behaviors of touchable functional components that work with different input devices are essentially re-implemented from scratch using mostly these with proper which come then with baked-in accessibility and all the behaviors necessary to make them truly accessible. And this is not something that was done just for the sake of, or it was just because you could either do a job where you try to build on top of existing primitives and trying to normalize, remove quirks and add functionality to this, often probably fighting against the default implementation, or you just start with a blank and you build it from scratch. You invest a lot of time on doing that, but once you get it right, then you have a very solid implementation.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes as web developers, we get a little hung up on, like, we feel like our view source should be like super polished, right? And look great, where at the end of the day, that doesn't like, the things that matter are things like developer experience. So like you said, like, the developers are not using, this isn't what their source code looks like. This is basically compiled into it. So the developer experience is still fine. And then the user's experience. And I mean, the users don't care what your source looks like. And as long as it's accessible and a lot of work has been put in to make sure that it is, then really at the end of the day, that stuff doesn't really matter. And I almost feel like as web developers, we kind of somewhat have to get away from that, because it's not like iOS and Android developers care about the like compiled compiled C code that comes out and drives their apps. Like, no, at the end of the day, it's how good the app functions and performs that matters.
Right. Yeah. So in my scale of priorities, first comes user experience often. Always, I would say. And so I would do whatever it takes to provide the best user experience. And if my HTML is kind of cryptic in the end, that's fine, I guess. As soon as, of course, you compensate that with a great developer experience, like you said, because it has to be, in order for you to move fast and build quality things, you gotta have also the right tools. And that's what, in the end, also the framework provides.
And I think that's a good way of framing it. And I think it seems to be, at least in my experience, true for this library, because like I said, and I'd encourage, if you're listening to this right now, just head to Twitter's mobile website and try it out, because I think you'll be pretty impressed by how snappy it is. I've always been especially impressed by the scrolling handling on the mobile Twitter site, because like scrolling on the mobile web is like my personal biggest pet peeve. Like, almost nobody does it right because it's really, really hard to do. And the implementation in Twitter with React Native Web is quite good. Like, you can go to Twitter on your phone, start scrolling, and it's not quite as smooth as native, but it's really close, and it's really well implemented. And you could tell a lot of care and time and effort went into it.
Right. I think they put a lot of work into that. I'm not sure if it's completely custom implementation, but I know for sure that React Native and React Native Web, I believe, come with a scroll view component that comes already with virtualization built in. And virtualization, for the ones who are not familiar with the technique, is this process of rendering just what you see on screen and a little bit above and below, and so that your, as you said, scroll experience is very smooth. And this is normally used when there is a lot of content. Imagine hundreds, thousands of tweets or table rows or something like that.
Yeah, this is another case where I feel like, to me, one of the bigger reasons that people think native apps are quote unquote better is because it just has better primitives for this. Like on iOS or Android, you have UI table view on iOS. You have, I think it's Android.widget dot something for doing this, for like it's just this pre-built-in component that you just use, and like your scrolling is just good because the platform has a thing that makes it good. Whereas on the web, you need to know that something like this exists and to use it. And even then, it's hard to get quite as good as native, because it's not built into the browser. It's just some like user land JavaScript that has to make it happen. And that's can be good, but it still struggles to compete with what native can do.
Right. I mean, the web platform folks, like I believe I've done work and they care about those things too. It's just there's a lot to catch up with native, right? I've heard that, if I'm not mistaken, at some point I read actually a few conversations around building a virtualized list component for the web. There are a lot of, obviously, it's quite complex piece of UI, and there are a lot of complications when building it, searching and stuff. But and there is a lot of work in coordinating this work in an open, massive platform is also really hard. The advantage of a native platform is that they are proprietary, closed sometimes, and they can just do what they think is best for the platform.
That sort of brings up another question for me, because since I think React Native Web is one of the better solutions for making things more, I guess, like touch friendly or building apps that are more mobile friendly, I'm curious why it isn't more used, or if you have any opinions or theories about that. Not that it's like unpopular. I mean, I had heard of it before this, but it's not something you hear like as a common thing that people are using. Like off the top of my head, I couldn't name another like major site or anything built using that. And there's a whole lot of sites. I know a whole lot of bad mobile websites out there, things that could benefit from this. So I'm curious why you don't think more people have sort of got on board with this sort of approach.
Yeah. So first of all, React Native Full Web is not it's probably not a good option for every type of website. It works great for applications like Twitter, where you probably render a shell and then you do a lot of rendering on the client side. The CSS solution that comes with it is not from that server-side responsive web design friendly, because there's no concept of media queries. There's no concept of pseudo elements, the state like hover, focus, and all that. And so styling is basically a function of state. So a little bit like inline styles. And in general, the approach, the way how you build a React Native application is slightly different from the web. It's you have way less freedom in what you do. You can use way less DOM APIs, which still React Native for Web allows you to do, because you can write platform code in a way for the web if you really need to use any web specific API. But in a way, you kind of have to reconsider a bit what you've learned in the past in many areas, and that could be probably had a little bit of friction, and many people say like, why would I need that? While still at first don't know how it works, I'm not familiar with the library itself, and at the same time I'm limited in this and this way.
Time is of the essence when identifying and resolving issues in your software, and our friends at Raygun are here to help. Their brand new alerting feature is now available for crash reporting and real user monitoring to make sure you're quickly notified of the errors, crashes, and front-end performance issues that matter most to you and your business. Set thresholds for your alert based on an increase in error count, a spike in load time, or new issues introduced in the latest deployment, along with custom filters that give you even greater control. Assign multiple users to ensure the right team members are notified, with alerts linked directly to the issue in Raygun, taking you to the root cause faster. Never miss another mission-critical issue in your software again. Try Raygun Alerting today and create a world-class issue resolution workflow that gives you and your customer peace of mind. Visit raygun.com to learn more. Their simple usage plans start from as little as $4 per month with unlimited apps and users. That's raygun.com to start your free 14-day trial.
Yeah, so it seems like you kind of have like being touch friendly has to be a big enough problem for you that you need something a little more involved like this. Like I'm guessing your average like company that's just got like a mobile website has it's way overkill, right? Because it's like there's just to make a few links and buttons work a bit better, it's not really worth the hassle. But imagine anything that has like a lot of interactivity, like people are, like you said, I liked the bit too about you're kind of rendering a shell and then the client's doing a whole bunch of work and there's a lot of interactivity. Something that's like more like a native app, honestly. Those types of things seem like the ones that could benefit from this sort of approach.
Yeah, and React Native for Web can still be rendered on the server. It doesn't have to be fully client side, but there are some features, like I mentioned. There's no concept of media queries responsive. It's a tricky one because obviously on the server you have no means to know what is the viewport of the current visitor, and that could be a little bit of an issue. But otherwise, yeah, it's a stricter framework, and therefore people often probably feel a bit restricted on what they think they can do. But in the long term, probably having fewer choices and a set of good APIs makes it for a better, higher quality application. The problem is, in those cases, it's really hard until you have experience it. And that's probably the reason why it's not as popular as it could or should.
Yeah, you sort of have to feel the pain of it before you
or maybe sometimes you don't realize that there could be a way that makes it for a more maintainable code base.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And I wonder too if some of it is that people think React Native Web means like you have to be building an iOS or Android app.
Exactly.
Too. Like I almost wonder if the naming somewhat holds it back.
Yeah, there's that too. And Nicholas, the original author, keeps repeating this, that folks, you keep in mind that Twitter.com is not meant to replace the iOS and Android clients. It's just using that framework because the API is so good that made us so productive, and now we can we can iterate faster, we can build new stuff, and preserve a very good degree of quality. But the fact that it's React Native for web, and then it's like I'm writing a web code with React Native APIs, but it's not native or something like that.
Yeah, we should suggest a rebrand.
So right now, yeah, recently, like a few months ago, Nicholas created an official Twitter account for React Native for Web, and now calling it React Web. So who knows over time if this will be rebranded? Yeah, drop them.
Cool. Well, one other thing I want to poke your brain about, because I know you've done a lot of work into sort of just server-side stuff. I know you have a background in a number of those different types of frameworks. And I know that we've had conversations on this podcast with a number of different guests, because one sort of trend I'm seeing in the front-end world is that the barrier between like what is client-side and what is server-side is getting kind of complicated. Like React used to be like, your React app's just a client-side app and you throw it on some server somewhere and then you're good to go. And nowadays there's Next, there's React server components. Remix, at the time we're recording this, is newly free for everybody to use. So I'll start by just asking you like a sort of open-ended question. Like are you seeing that sort of trend? Like where do you stand on this sort of tech and how things are laid out today?
So yeah, initially when React came out, probably we were at the time where we were doing a mix of either fully client-side MVC rendered applications or old school like server-side rendering with progressive and then enhanced, sometimes not even enhanced, just a bit of jQuery on top of that, and imperative changes and mutation and basically adding behavior with JavaScript. So React came out, and back then, essentially Facebook for a long while wasn't server-side rendering for them wasn't a need, right? So they provided us with APIs to do server-side rendering, but the story really was like, okay, people figured we have this new thing. It's really good. We are in this navigating this trend of render client, MVC and rendering on the client, React is much better. It's just view, take data and render your UI and make it. It's an awesome evolution if you think about that. But for a long time, we just focused on client-side rendering, like an empty page with just a link tags, title, and a script that was linking to the bundle of our application. That's probably also because the first tool that came out in this space was Create React App, which has never supported a server-side render. I don't know if it does at this point, but probably
I don't think
not.
It does. Not out of the box. I don't think so.
And so this was the major scaffolding tool that we got, and it also happened to become the most popular. And then Next came into play, right? And I think it was around 2015 or 16, I don't remember exactly. But essentially, Guillermo and a few other people from Vercel open sourced Next.js, which was the server-side rendering framework that they used to build their own website. And over time, this became so popular because server-side rendering came out of the box. And the good thing about server-side rendering is that obviously you can offload a lot of work to the server and then just do interaction and take it from there and take your app, make your app interactive. So basically, Next, it was a huge step forward. The only difference is that we were still, because of how React is built, basically booting up, downloading and restarting the app on the client, right? So iterating everything. And so even if the page rendered on the server and we could send immediately something to the user, we're still left with this big JavaScript bundle on the client. And there's been a lot of effort now to kind of try to rebalance those two and offload a lot of this work to the server like it's always meant to be. And this is starting to be being possible thanks to React Server Components, which essentially takes care of rendering the static parts on the server and not ending up in the client bundle. So you end up with this separation like in the old days where we were rendering mostly on the server and the client was only the interactive parts.
So I'm curious too, because React Server Components, I think they announced them basically like around this time last year, if I'm remembering correctly.
More or less.
And I remember playing with them and being very confused. So I'm curious if you've toyed with them. Have you found like the APIs to be like, okay, so I should say I was confused, but I think at the level they were at, especially at that time, they were really intended for libraries to like build around and do something interesting with. So I don't think they were necessarily supposed to be super developer facing and such. So I'll offer that as a caveat. But I still like looked at him and went like, man, there's somebody's going to have to be building something smart on top of this if it's going to be like a building block that many people are going to want to use. So I'm curious your experience with them and what you thought. Right.
You're totally right that they intended the meta framework to come up with the integration, right? To offer, to integrate server component so that you as a consumer just need to use them, essentially. So the setup indeed could be quite complicated because you need to work with bundlers and make this distinction between server and clients and make sure that everything works well together. So yeah, I think the initial plan and the plan for a while will be that you as a developer will use server component through an existing framework like Next.js, probably Remix, I don't know, either other framework like Gatsby if they are planning on supporting those. And just to explain to probably the listener that are not that familiar with this is the idea is that you have three different types of components. One that are only meant to run on the server, so they rendered in a node environment, and those have a .server.js or extension. And so that code cannot have state, context, anything. Well, state maybe, but effect, no use effect, no use layer effect, and they are not interactive. So that's static code that gets rendered on server. Then there are pure clients components that are only rendered on the clients, and then there are ones that are rendered on the server, but then they are also enhanced on the client, and those are the client components. And so you use a little bit of both, trying to distribute your application wisely.
And I think one of the more compelling reasons I saw is, like, on the client, we're constantly concerned about bundle size and such. So you take like a date parsing library, like Moment was popular for a while, and then it got some backlash because it was big and people came out with some lightweight alternatives to it. But if your date parsing logic lived on the server, because there's no reason you necessarily have to parse dates on the client. So if you put all that stuff on the server, well, then, hey, it doesn't matter. Well, I mean, it matters a whole lot less how big your date parsing library is, because, well, it's on the server and the server has it loaded into memory.
Right.
And so
it's never gonna make it to the client. So
so it's kind of exciting. So, and like, I'm guessing in theory, React will sort of reconcile all of the complexity so that you don't have to worry about, because it, like, some of it, like, to me sounds like a bit of a debugging hell too, because at least like with Next is pretty smart about, like, okay, you have your log of your server stuff and you have your log of like your client stuff. But man, like when if it really does become like different chunks of my apps are rendered in different ways, like I could see that becoming fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the good thing is that you said you like the Next way, and definitely Next is going to provide an integration. The server component will work out of the box there, and I'm pretty sure that they're going to come up with something that is as good, if not probably better. Yeah, but yeah, I agree with you. It could get tricky.
Would you recommend people start to like look into this stuff, or is this very much like just sort of be aware but wait and see sort of thing?
So right now, it's not me. Like you can tell from Next only having support for server component in an experimental mode. So you have to explicitly enable them. It's an experimental flag. And you gotta use, I think, React 18, which is still in beta or alpha. So if you want to play with it, it's fine. I think probably even if you wanted, you couldn't use them in production already, I think.
Yeah.
But the concept itself, it's quite simple. Like, again, you have the separation of server and client, and the way how you do that, the separation is just using different extensions like .server.js or .client.js. So if you want to try it with Next, I'm pretty sure it's already possible. And otherwise, I'm not sure of other framework except for the sample demo app that they released last year with a blog post.
Yeah, the sense I got is, like, unless you're an engineer like at Facebook or at Vercel, like if you're working on one of these libraries, you probably do want to dig into this. Maybe if like this is, you work on some sort of enormous app and this is like a huge problem for you, like you're like, if you're working on a Facebook.com sort of app where like every millisecond matters, then maybe these sort of optimizations are for you. But I think for the average person, just we can wait and see what happens and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like people should jump right in on whatever comes out every week or so, or every few months. That's in fact not how you're supposed to approach those things. Like, I mean, being curious is great, but you don't feel the pressure to like having to write everything as soon as something is up. And I'm pretty sure that, again, as a user, you can just try it and play with it, and it's super easy if you use Next with this experimental flag turned on, and you can find the instruction in the docs or the demo app from Facebook.
Yeah, it's a good way of phrasing it. There's a big difference between like just toying with it in a few free hours versus like considering moving your production infrastructure.
Right. Also because you gotta first get acquainted to the new paradigms and really think it through before you just start executing. Myself included. Right. If you ask me right now, obviously I know how to use server component, but I will have to put some thoughts into how re-architect an application to work well with that way of doing things.
That's probably just good advice overall, whether we're talking about React Native Web or like any of these server frameworks. Just if you're curious, absolutely tinker. Like that's one of the cool things about being a developer is like all of this stuff is just out there. Like you could just try it. There's nothing stopping you. And maybe you're inspired to build something, maybe not, but it's...
Yeah, and the same is with, just to connect to the initial topic that we started with, is like, it's again all about curiosity. If you want, those things are out there for you to play with, to investigate, to learn, and sometimes they might not be exactly what you already know, and that's probably the problem with the Twitter HTML being ugly and foreign to you, but there's probably a reason behind it. And nowadays, many things are open, and if you put a little bit of time and effort, probably you can even level up a little bit. And I feel like that's what I've done when I went and reversed engineer Twitter's source codes that were not necessarily obvious or clear in the beginning.
Yeah, we talked about some of the advantages of native. Like this is one of the advantages of the web. Like view source very much is a thing. And even if the output is a little messy in the case of Twitter, you can still get to the bottom of it. Like whereas with native, that's all like, good luck finding the source code for Twitter's iOS app, right? Like that's under like lock and key, and they're never going to divulge that stuff. So it's a platform that absolutely inspires a lot of curiosity. So that's something to be, it's excited to be a web developer.
Yeah, and in fact, that was like what I even did for the previous version of Twitter.com at some point, like many, many years ago, where I went and kind of reverse engineered their minified JS because I wanted to had inline previews of images. And now I'm talking like 2011 or something, when there were still not inline previews of the images like today. And in the process of reverse engineering this minified code, I learned a lot of small JavaScript features, like what is the comma operator for, or I would see a lot of exclamation mark 0, which basically means true. It's like negating. That's how the minifier transpile like these things.
That's like next level view sourcing.
There were a lot of things, like what is the tilde operator for in JavaScript, and so it could be fun.
Yeah, I have no idea what the tilde operator does, so now I'm curious. Well, cool. Giuseppe, this has been a lot of fun. Is there anything we missed? Anything else you want to point out to people before we head into the picks?
No, I mean, probably just since we talked about Twitter, just in general, nothing really technical related to what nothing related to the technical things we talked about, but more like of an approach of, discussing those things on Twitter with people. People often have good intentions when they tweet about things. So try to be nice, I guess. And it's really tempting to try to reply to every tweet you see about some controversial topic, but probably could be just a reason for you to write about what you know and share it with everybody, so that you can clarify and maybe reach out to a broader audience. And lastly, I think it's good to have a critical approach to things, and I always have it myself. But again, without knowledge, just being critical probably sometimes brings nothing, right? So pair that with knowledge. I think you do great.
That is a really good note to end on. I've certainly been guilty on both ends of that on Twitter. So it's always good to remember there's always people on the other end, and usually those people have good intentions. So always something good to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
Hi, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and lately I've been coaching some people on starting some podcasts and in some cases just taking their career to the next level. You know, whether you're beginner going to intermediate going to advanced, whether you're trying to get noticed in the community or go freelance, I've been helping these folks figure out how to get in front of people, how to build relationships, and how to build their careers and max out and just go to the next level. So if you're interested in talking to me and having me help you go to the next level, go to topenddevs.com/coaching. I will give you a 1-hour free session where we can figure out what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, and figure out what the next steps are. And then from there, we can figure out how to get you to the place you want to go. So once again, that's topenddevs.com/coaching.
Well, cool. Let's head into the picks, and I can start us off. I'm going to pick Dune, the movie, which I just saw a couple nights ago, and it was really, really good. It made me want to read. It's based off a fantasy book series that's I think it's several decades old at this point. It got me wanting to read the books because the movie is a two-parter. Like, they make it very clear that it's part 1 of 2, and it's not short. It's like I think it's like a 2.5-hour movie, but it was ridiculously engrossing. You get sucked right into this world, and it's very, very entertaining. So that's going to be my pick for this week.
Right. And looking forward for the second episode, actually.
Yeah. So you've seen the first one as well?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, it's really, really good. It makes you sad that the second one isn't just out already.
Yeah.
Do you have any picks for us today, Giuseppe?
Yeah, I actually picked Ultra.tf. It's a small application, a multimedia smart canvas for your mind. It's built by Rauno Freiberg, who was a developer at Vercel. It's basically a website where you can paste or drag stuff into the canvas and they appear in their best forms. So videos, notes, images, audio, code, you name it. It's ultra.tf, ultra.tf. And it's really cool, I think.
Awesome. Well, very cool. Giuseppe, last question for you. If people want to follow you and whatnot, where's the best place to do that?
Yeah, that will be Twitter, but I'm afraid we'll have to link it into the show notes because it's really hard to spell. Probably I wanted to have the exclusive on my full name, but now I realize it's probably not the best chance. Yeah. Anyway, I'm Giuseppe Gurgone, and I think you'll find a link to it.
It will be in the show notes. So
Awesome.
If you're interested, go ahead and scroll down and check that out. Well, thanks so much. This has been a fun chat. I've learned some stuff. So
Thank you,
very much appreciate it. All right, everybody. Until next week.
Bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.